February. I don't know about you. Last night we were watching the Olympics, and we've been the Olympics have been going on a few days, and I felt a growing frustration as I watched the women's big air ski jump competition last night. I think it was sparked by patriotism and the fact that so far the U.S. hasn't done so good in the count. And then when we saw, I think her name was Eileen Gu from California. She was born in California. She was raised in California. She was doing really, really well. When we saw her doing really well, I was a little frustrated because though she was born in California and from California, she was competing for China. And the last thing I wanted to see was China get more medals. So I think I even voiced my frustration. Like, Marla, man, can you believe it? I don't think someone that's from the United States that grew up here should be competing for another country. To which my wife, which was very wise, said, Marla, oh, she said, Mike, I don't think we can judge her. I don't think it's fair to judge her. We don't know her story. We don't know what the culture she grew up in. Maybe her parents were from China. And then she said, Micah, you have a daughter who was born in another country, who grew up in another country. And when I started to think about it, I mean, she was right. And even more so, my daughter Samara likes to barrel race. She trained in Brazil. Did I say China? I meant Brazil. Sorry. She trained in Brazil. Um, so she was right. And these kind of questions come up in when we're talking about Olympic years and who you're going to compete for if you're dual citizen. The question of who you're going to compete for. It's a question of your passport country. Who is your passport country? And a simple definition of a passport country is nothing more, nothing less than citizenship that you have from a country. You're a citizen. If you're a passport holder, you're a citizen of that country. So according to what we saw last night, even some experiences in my own family, you can be born in one country. You can grow up in that same country. You can train and grow in a sport in that country, and yet be a citizen and compete for a different country. Maybe it's my own history and my own experiences, sensitivity. But as I've been reading through the Genesis and now Exodus, I've been noticing a reoccurring theme of living in one place, but not exactly as a local, living in one place as a foreigner. Abraham, the father of our faith, he was called to leave the land of his father and go into a land that God would show him and to live in that land as a foreigner. And for the rest of his life, he lived in tents, camping in one spot to another, never fully belonging to the land, to that culture, to the people in which he lived. But it wasn't just him. If you look at how history unfolded, his son Isaac, his grandson Jacob, they lived the same way as foreigners, strangers in the land. The Portuguese word for foreigner is estrangeiro, and the root of that word is translated as stranger, strange, to live as a stranger. But it didn't stop there. For as you read through Genesis, you have Joseph being sold into slavery, going into another foreign land, and the names he gives his sons reflect that he was sojourning. And now fast forward to the Exodus, the people of Israel. They grew into a great people in Egypt, but they were always outsiders, eventually becoming slaves. So when God finally steps in and ends their slavery, he delivers them back into the wilderness, and they go living as tents as their forefathers had done. Even Moses, we talk about, he grew up in one culture. And then he was expelled from that land of Egypt before God used him to free the Israelites. And the names he gives his sons reflect this this living in one land and yet not fully there. And it doesn't end with just the freedom from Egypt. The next 40 years, they live as sojourners, wandering around in the wilderness from one place to another. And when God gives them the law, they have specific ways they are supposed to treat foreigners who live in among them. And it's always with this divine postscript that says, because you too were once foreigners. Then in the law, according to the law, once the land is settled, God prescribes religious celebrations. Of one of them is a week of living in tents. So they would always remember the time they spent as sojourners. And as if you were wondering, this wasn't just an Old Testament thing. In the book of Zechariah, chapter 14:16, tells us in the millennial reign of Christ that's still yet to come, it says, "And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King," the K is capitalized there, "the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, living in tents every once in a while, to remind people that they're still yet sojourners, still en route, that we're not yet home." Reminding his people, reminding us as Christians, our passport country isn't the United States or China or Brazil, but it's heaven. Listen to what the Apostle Paul wrote about our citizenship to the church in Ephesus, chapter 2, verse 19. He says, "Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God." Now, not just Paul, uh, but Peter also picked up on this when he wrote in his first epistle, 1 Peter 1:1. He starts it out, "To the pilgrims of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, elect according to the foreknowledge of God the Father and sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience and sprinkling of the blood of Jesus Christ." He starts out writing to the pilgrims. And then in a chapter later, in verses 9 and 10, he writes, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who were once not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy." And now in the next two verses 11 and 12, he tells us how we are to compete. Now that we have our nationality defined, he says, "Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works which they observe glorify God in the day of visitation." So I'm sitting here this morning in a tent as a reminder that we are just passing through. As Christians, this United States of America, no matter how much we love it or how we feel about it, isn't our passport country. That though we were born here, though we were even raised here, that our passport country, our citizenship isn't necessarily here, that we are headed somewhere much, much better, a place that will make our current dwellings, our current houses seem. So I hope you have a great day in this Olympic season. God bless. Ciao.